The Rules Committee will come to order. We have a busy day in front of us. We start by considering H.R. 447, the National Apprenticeship Act. This legislation is intended to help create nearly 1 million new apprenticeship opportunities for in-demand jobs in fields like healthcare, cybersecurity, construction, and advanced manufacturing. We passed a nearly identical bill in the House last Congress on a bipartisan basis. The impacts of the coronavirus have only grown since then. Our workers need help, and they need it now. I'm hopeful that with the change in leadership in the Senate and the White House, that this bipartisan bill can now get across the finish line. Second, we're going to consider a budget resolution that will give Congress the option of using a budget reconciliation measure to get COVID relief to struggling Americans as quickly as possible. And third, after finishing the hearing portion of our meeting, we will complete our work organizing the committee for the 117th Congress. And before we go to our first panel of witnesses, let me turn to our distinguished ranking member, Mr. Cole, for any remarks that he wishes to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Today's hearings on H.R. 447, the National Apprenticeship Act of 2021, so-called emergency item, Concurrent Resolution 11, which is a budget resolution for fiscal year 2021. I hope my friends see the irony in labeling this budget an emergency item, seeing as we are bringing it to the floor more than 290 days or 9.5 months after Congress should have concluded action on this issue. On H.R. 447, if the subject seems familiar to our returning members, it's because we considered a nearly identical bill just 2.5 months ago. At the time, Republicans on the Education and Labor Committee and here on this committee indicated a desire to work with the majority to improve that product. We recommended the majority take into account employer-led innovation when considering the apprenticeship program for tomorrow. Unfortunately, the majority does not appear to have heeded this advice, and today's product is a mere recycling of H.R. 8294 from the 116th Congress. As such, I am disappointed by today's bill and will again oppose its passage. As I shared during our previous hearing on this topic, apprenticeships have an important role to play in building and training of the future workforce. They allow American workers to achieve success without the traditional burdens of a student loan debt. Apprenticeships help hundreds of thousands of American workers realize the dream of a high-paying, skilled career. Republicans share the goal of reauthorizing the National Apprenticeship Act. We simply disagree on the means by which the Democrats are attempting to do so in this bill. Rather than modernizing the apprenticeship system and embracing employer-led innovation, Democrats are once again doubling down on the system as it is, not as it could be. I look forward to hearing from Ranking Member Fox on the innovative suggestions Republicans on the Education and Labor Committee have for improving this bill. And I look forward to hearing why this approach is better for American workers than the one before us today. Mr. Chairman, at the end of the day, Republicans and Democrats want the same thing: a robust apprenticeship program that supports educating American workers for new high-paying careers. Though we may object to this bill, at the end of the day, I think we agree on more than we disagree. There's a clear opportunity here for us to produce a better piece of legislation that reauthorizes this important program while modernizing it for the future. Now that the Education and Labor Committee has been formed and can organize, they should go to work on doing just that. I will turn now to our emergency item, Concurrent Resolution 11, which the majority describes as a budget resolution, but which really is best considered as a shell budget for the purposes of moving toward a budget reconciliation bill to pave the way for a partisan Democrat-only COVID-19 relief package. There are two key points that concern me about today's resolution. First and foremost, I'm very concerned that the product the majority is putting forward today has not been vetted by the Budget Committee. As a former member of that committee, I took the responsibility of drafting and writing a budget each year very seriously and look forward to both the hearings in that committee leading up to the preparation of the budget, as well as the budget markup hearing itself. Through that process, individual members were given the chance to read, review, digest, and make suggestions for improving the budget each year. At the markup, members could offer amendments and have their ideas considered by the full committee. But rather than doing so this year, the majorities instead rushed the budget to the Rules Committee and then to the floor, even before the Budget Committee itself has held a single meeting yet this Congress. This is hardly regular order and hardly the type of robust process this item deserves. Second, this process is clearly designed to push forward toward a solely partisan Democrat-only COVID-19 relief bill. Though the majority has claimed to want to work with Republicans on a bipartisan process for this relief bill, we've yet to see any such bipartisanship here in the House. In the last Congress, we were able to pass 5 COVID-19 relief packages totaling nearly $4 trillion. Not all of that money has yet been spent. Yet the majority is now moving forward with yet another package, this one destined to be partisan spending bill, embracing only the ideas of the majority in the House. What's worse, the reconciliation instructions included in this budget only specify dollar figures. They do not offer up any direction on the types of policies to be considered. As such, using this procedure, the majority could use this shell as a vehicle for any policy goal, not merely COVID-19 relief. Could it be used for Medicare for all or for the Green New Deal? There's nothing in today's measure barring the majority from using this shell for those purposes. Let's be clear about what the majority is doing here. Rather than heeding the call of President Biden to work with Republicans and embrace bipartisanship, the majority has abandoned the idea of working with the Republicans just days into his administration. Instead, they're plunging ahead with this sham budget and the resulting reconciliation bill, heedless of any pretense of working with Republicans. This is hardly a good start to a new Congress, Mr. Chairman, and hardly the way to move this institution into a new era of bipartisanship. I strongly urge the majority to reconsider its course. There's still an opportunity to move forward in a bipartisan manner, just as President Biden said was his intention, and I hope the majority will take that chance. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman, and let me just say that you know, we'll see whether a bipartisan agreement can be worked out, but we're going to be prepared, and this is an emergency, and we need to act quickly. And as one who supports Medicare for all and a Green New Deal, I can assure you that that is not what is going to be contained in this, as much as I wish it would be. But in any event, I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge our new member of our committee, a gentlewoman from Minnesota, Michelle Fishbach, and we want to welcome her to this committee and look forward to working with her. And you have the opportunity to work with an incredible ranking member, Mr. Cole, who is one of my favorite members in the Congress and a man of great integrity. And I'm not so bad either. So, but we look forward to having a good working relationship. And again, welcome. At this time, I'd like to welcome our witnesses to provide testimony on HR 447, the National Apprenticeship Act of 2021. Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Fox, we are delighted that you are here. Without objection, any written materials you submit to rules documents at mail.house.gov before the conclusion of this hearing will be entered into the record. I'm now happy to recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Chairman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Cole. I'm pleased to speak in support of HR 447, the National Apprenticeship Act of 2021, an urgently needed reauthorization of the National Apprenticeship Act, which I've introduced with the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Brian Fitzpatrick. Registered apprenticeships are this nation's most successful federally funded workforce development initiative. Each year, hundreds of thousands of Americans count on registered apprenticeships to access paid on-the-job learning opportunities and career pathways. Starting on their first day, apprentices earn wages that grow as their skills develop, learn in-demand skills, and work towards a nationally recognized credential. According to the Department of Labor, the apprentices earn an average of $15 an hour. And 94% of registered apprenticeships are employed upon completion, earning an average starting wage of more than $70,000 a year. Invested in registered apprenticeships not only benefit workers, but also strengthens our economy and helps our employers build pipelines of talented, dedicated workers. For every dollar invested in apprenticeships, employers receive roughly $1.50 in increased productivity, reduced waste, and greater innovation. Increased funding for high-quality workforce development programs are precisely what we need to help workers get back on their feet during the COVID-19 pandemic. Millions of workers are still without work, and research indicates that more than 7 million of the jobs lost during this pandemic will not come back. And amid this economic downturn, the National Apprenticeship Act of 2021 ensures that taxpayer-funded investments in workforce development are directed towards proven programs that maintain clear standards for performance and transparency. Bipartisan legislation codifies the key elements that we've made in registered apprenticeships. The bipartisan legislation codifies the key elements that have made the registered apprenticeship the gold standard for the workforce development programs. It is also codified in innovative models such as competency-based apprenticeship programs and new industry programs which recognize apprenticeable occupations as easily scale successful apprenticeship programs across the country, so that we're expanding the number of occupations where apprenticeships would be available beyond the traditional building trades and into things like finance and healthcare and others. And specifically, this legislation streamlines the standards of registered apprenticeships, youth apprenticeships, and pre-apprenticeships. It makes it easier for apprentices and employers to participate, guarantees critical quality standards and worker protections across all programs, and ensures that employers recognize apprenticeship credentials nationwide. And that distinguishes them from what are called IRAPs, industry recognized apprenticeship programs, which are not recognized nationally. Their credentials are not recognized nationally. The quality is not guaranteed by the Department of Labor, and there's no need to vary from the gold standard of registered apprenticeship programs, where the demand for the program is more than the limited opportunities. And there's no barrier, frankly, to a business from home baking its own job training program. It's just that federal government should be investing in the gold standard so long as the need is still unmet. But the proposal permanently codifies the Office of Apprenticeship under the Department of Labor and state apprenticeship agencies, and it instructs the office to convene stakeholders to expand apprenticeships in emerging sectors, like I said, of healthcare, manufacturing, financial, and technology. The legislation takes an important step towards increasing diversity of apprenticeship participants, expands apprenticeship opportunities for women, people of color, people with disabilities, and people impacted by the criminal and juvenile justice systems in occupations and sectors in which they have been historically underrepresented. Finally, the proposed reauthorization invests in a national apprenticeship system by creating a dedicated funding stream to states. The bill establishes a new grant program to modernize apprenticeship opportunities and ensure that students can pursue high school or post-secondary education while participating in apprenticeships. The combined investment of $3.5 billion over the next 5 years will deliver significant returns for workers, businesses, and taxpayers. Notably, the legislation will create an additional $1 million apprenticeship opportunities beyond which is expected under present law. And it will save money through tax revenues and decreased spending of about way over what we're spending increased tax revenues and decreased spending on public assistance program. And in other words, the bill will more than pay for itself. As the chair mentioned, last November, the House came together and passed the legislation on a vote of 246 to 140. And so I'm sure that we can all agree that the urgent need to invest in our best workforce development strategy has not diminished, it's actually even grown. So once again, by passing this proposal, we'll help accelerate our economic recovery and expand workers' access to paid work-based learning, in-demand skills, and high-quality pathways to rewarding careers. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott, Chairman Scott. And now I turn to Ranking Member Fox. We're delighted to have you here, and without objection, any written materials you submit to rules documents at mail.house.gov before the conclusion of this hearing will be entered into the record. So welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you and Ranking Member Cole for the opportunity to speak on H.R. 447, the National Apprenticeship Act of 2021. It does seem like only yesterday we were here for this same purpose. The House has long established procedures to develop legislation. These procedures respect the majority and minority and ensure that both sides are represented. Democrats are ignoring these procedures and bringing this bill straight to the floor, steamrolling the committee of jurisdiction and essentially silencing the minority. I know this bill is largely the same piece of legislation the House voted on in the fall, but our committee has 11 new Republicans. Don't their constituents deserve to have their voice heard in this debate? This is particularly frustrating given the bipartisan agreement that the apprenticeship system needs to be updated to provide more opportunities to Americans. I've dedicated years to improving our nation's workforce development system, and that includes advocating for job-creating programs like apprenticeships. Nothing can prepare a student quite like on-the-job experience, and apprenticeships, both traditional and non-traditional, are a tried and true method of preparing students to enter the workforce with the skills they need to succeed. In recent years, steps were taken to increase the number of high-quality apprenticeships and introduce innovation into work-based learning programs. For example, the Trump administration created industry-recognized apprenticeship program, IRAPs, which provide another avenue for companies seeking skilled workers who want to develop programs with more input from other industry leaders rather than from the federal government. Unfortunately, the Democrats' bill will put a stop to the innovation and progress. In fact, it would take away opportunities for the 131 IRAPs that have been recognized in the last 4 months, the vast majority of which are for nursing credentials in the middle of public health and workforce crisis. By prohibiting these innovative programs, the bill assumes a registered system that works for some employers will meet the diverse needs of every business across the country, regardless of size or industry. In fiscal 2019, there were 81,000 Americans who graduated from registered apprenticeships. Democrats assume that simply throwing more taxpayer dollars at a broken system will lead to the creation of 1 million new apprenticeships, an admirable goal. But they have failed to address the underlying problems with the system, and along the way are shutting down a new, more flexible option that businesses have already expressed interest in. Stifling innovation and doubling down on an 80-year-old system that favors union-driven apprenticeships will hurt our efforts to get more Americans back on track. Employers know best what skills their employees require to excel in the workplace. That is why Republicans believe Congress should encourage employer-led innovation in the apprenticeship space. Yet this bill would force job creators to deal with overly prescriptive requirements, additional bureaucracy, and time-consuming paperwork on top of the one-size-fits-all approach. It's no wonder this stifling environment has discouraged new and small businesses from participating in the registered apprenticeship system for years now. On the other hand, an amendment offered by Representative Stefanik fixes many of these issues by improving the registered apprenticeship system in such a way that allows more employers to participate while also allowing additional flexibility for the Department of Labor to stand up programs outside the registered system. Several other Republicans have also offered amendments that will actually help increase the number of apprenticeship opportunities. I urge the committee to make all of these amendments in order, as we know that apprenticeships will play a defining role in closing the skills gap and putting more Americans to work. But it only if employees and job creators are given the flexibility to innovate and develop high quality earn and learn programs within reach, without overreach from Washington. I urge my colleagues to oppose H.R. 447, which closes pathways to work for students and job seekers. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Fox. I appreciate it. Thank you both. You know, it seems like it was just yesterday that we were considering this bill, and it kind of was. It was November 20th. And so your testimonies from November 20th and today kind of ring the same. And so I think my questions and answers would probably be the same. So I will save everybody some time by yielding to the distinguished and more eloquent gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Cole, for any comments or questions he may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for those kind words. And it strikes me it's fitting that we're doing this on Groundhog Day, because it's exactly what we've seen before. And unfortunately, the process is exactly what we've seen before as well. That is, no chance to have bipartisan input. And let me just, for the record, offer when I was chairman of the Labor, Health, and Human Services Education Subcommittee, we actually supported President Obama's request for funds fully for apprenticeship programs because we believe in them. And when President Trump came in, he actually went beyond what President Obama had asked for. And in a bipartisan manner, we also, once again, more than funded the request, or fully funded the request of the Trump administration. So again, this is something we both demonstrated on both sides of the aisle we believe in very strongly. And I guess I miss the fact we didn't do what we did when we reauthorized the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act several years ago. Mr. Scott, Chairman Scott, and Ranking Member Fox were both big players in that, as I recall. And we actually pushed that across the floor. It passed 415 to 6. President Obama signed it. It was a marvelous piece of bipartisan work, and I think it yielded really good results for the American workers. So I'm a little disappointed that we're not pursuing that same path today. Ms. Fox, I think we probably both agree that much more can and should be done to support employers who wish to have a strong, educated workforce, and that apprentice programs are critical in that effort. As you noted in your testimony, we should have more flexibility in the design of apprenticeship programs as opposed to a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach. So as opposed to how WIOA was drafted, with wide bipartisan support, why do you think the majority has chosen to double down on what's an antiquated apprenticeship system as opposed to allowing for flexibility that the Republicans on your committee have advocated?
Well, I think it's an opposition to allowing innovation in business and industry in this country. So.
Sorry. I think it's really an issue of control and opposition to allowing business and industry to do what industry and business knows is best. This bill ties all apprenticeships to unions, and that's not the way we need to be going in this country. And Mr. Scott said that this was the most successful form of apprenticeships. Well, I don't think we've had an objective study of that. And I would say that one of the things that you and I come from a background of wanting to see facts rather than hyperbole. And I don't believe that's necessarily true. An 80-year-old system can be called successful, but I'd really like to see the numbers. The IRAP system hasn't really had an opportunity to be tested as well as I think it will be. Businesses and industry have been telling us for years that the current system of education across this country is failing them. And what they want is to be able to help their employees, prospective employees, to get the skills they need to have great paying jobs and to have advancement in their careers. And I think that was the direction we were going in the previous administration, and it's what we should be doing. Stifling innovation in this country is not the way to do
Chairman Scott, I certainly would want to give you a chance to respond if you care to.
Sure. The IRAP program is, there's no quality control. It's basically a home-baked program by the businesses. There's no quality control. They're not recognized. The benefit of an apprenticeship program, if you go through a registered apprenticeship program in Oklahoma, you can come to my district in Norfolk, Virginia, and the employer knows immediately what you can do and what you're qualified for, and can hire you without any more. So it's high quality, nationally recognized, and there are not enough of these positions. There's more demand for the positions. So why are we going to invest federal money into unrecognized low quality programs when there are high quality programs that are nationally recognized that are available? So there's no need for it, and there is no barrier. If you want one of these home-baked programs, you can do it. There's no barrier. It's just that the federal money ought to go to those that are high-quality programs. But if you want to home-bake a job program and call it an apprenticeship program, that's fine. You can do it, but don't ask for federal investment of money when the registered apprenticeship opportunities are going begging for lack of support.
Let me ask you one other question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Fox made, I think, a very good point when she said she has 11 new members on the committee on the Republican side. I'm sure you've got new members on the Democratic side as well. Shouldn't those members have been allowed an opportunity to put forward their suggestions before we just picked something up from the last Congress that they had nothing to do with and brought it immediately to the floor?
Well, this happens at the beginning of every session. The fact is, we don't even have our members yet, haven't organized. We have a lot of work to do, not only the COVID-19 relief bills, we also have the pension legislation, K through 12. We have a lot of work that needs to be done. We've had several hearings on this bill. It's been worked on. It was bipartisan up until the point when the former president decided that IRAPs needed to be in it. No one, that was a political decision. There was no indication for the need for these from chambers of commerce or from representatives of workers or business or anything. It just came from a bright idea from the administration, and all of a sudden what was a bipartisan process became partisan, but it's still passed, as it's been noted, with an overwhelming margin. It's very popular. These apprenticeship programs, the gold standard, the nationally recognized high quality programs, and that's what we need to expand. Now, if we get to the point where we can't fill the slots, then maybe we can open up opportunities somewhere else with lower quality, unrecognized programs. But so long as we have the demand for the slots that we're able to afford, it just seems to me that that's where we ought to focus our attention.
Well, I have such confidence in you, Mr. Chairman, and the ranking member. I know you can improve on anything. So, and I know the workload you maintain on your committee, which is pretty extensive, and I'm confident you could get it done. So I just genuinely regret we didn't have the opportunity to have a committee hearing here, have our new members participate, have other ideas put in front of it. But with that, I thank both our witnesses for their testimony and yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Chairman McGovern. I also want to take this opportunity to welcome our new members to the Rules Committee. Thank you also to Mrs. Fox for coming back to our committee with Chairman Scott to present once again this bill to help our workers. Look, the pandemic has taken a toll on workers. Many have lost their jobs, and it's been no fault of their own. We finally have a president that is making bold moves to deal with this pandemic. Our economy and our families across the U.S. have suffered for much too long. The Inland Empire, the district that I represent, has been down, this road of recovery once before. And after the last recession, we had to quickly get creative to help displaced workers find a job. And the recovery effort provided us with an opportunity to create a training center to meet the needs of local manufacturers and workers alike. Using a federal government grant, a local college in my district, Chaffey College, teamed up with a large manufacturer in my district, California Steel Industries, to train thousands of displaced workers in advanced manufacturing, providing them with basic skills that they need to fill the positions that are readily available. Through this program, individuals are able to receive certificates from the college in the state of California, certifying that they have the basic skills needed for the jobs that are available in our community. This is the type of program that is needed, not just in my district, but in many other areas of our country. And I know this because every single year since elected to Congress, I've held listening tours with our local manufacturers. One of the biggest challenges that I hear is the need to better train workers for advanced manufacturing jobs, basic skills. While we have many displaced workers, they lack the basic skills needed to work in the jobs that are available. And that's why I am encouraged that the committee is taking up the National Apprenticeship Act this week, legislation that can counter the pandemic's layoffs from turning into permanent long-term unemployment. The last thing that we need in my district is to continue to have the influx of goods that are coming in from all over the world into my community, and not having the opportunity to manufacture goods that we can ship right back to those countries so that we have even trade. This bill expands access to good jobs by creating 1 million more apprenticeships. The bill also recognizes that advanced manufacturing is a key sector for apprenticeship programs. And I have been advocating for this type of training program for several years now. My district's economy relies on advanced manufacturing. At the same time, many families in my district rely on good paying jobs in this industry. Seeing the success of the training program in my district, I want to make sure that we expanded these opportunities to all workers. My Bipartisan Bicameral Advanced Manufacturing Jobs in America Act would fund demonstration and pilot training and education programs between advanced manufacturers and training institutions to help job seekers. This is an ongoing issue. Manufacturers actually sit at the table and discuss their needs with the college and create opportunities for these displaced workers to learn the skills that they need in order to fill those jobs. The program would not only open up employment opportunities to many individuals, but also would meet the needs of our advanced manufacturing industry to help grow our local economy. I created this bill because I saw a solution that started in the Inland Empire in my district with the help of the federal government. I am thus a proud co-sponsor of the amendment introduced by Rep. Pappas and will allow for grant funding to be used for pilot projects, including in advanced manufacturing. We must give our constituents a fighting chance, and the National Apprenticeship Act supports access to good jobs and strengthens our economy at a time when that is needed. I urge my colleagues here to support this bill. But before yielding back my time, I want to take this opportunity to say to Chairman Bobby Scott that I also look forward to working with you to help improve the quality of work for 911 dispatchers and my bill that sits in your committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question for our witnesses, and I probably should know the answer, but I'm not able to find it in the bill. Does participation in one of these programs, does one have to be eligible to work in this country, i.e., citizen, green card holder?
Let me check on that and get back to you. I'll get back to you in a few minutes.
I don't know if you want it.
Yep, I appreciate that, Chairman Scott, Mr. Scott, Dr. Fox.
The people who participate in this do not have to be legal and do not have to be eligible to be in the country. So people could go in the apprenticeship program who are here illegally. I believe that's what you're asking.
That is correct. And a corollary to that question was going to be, and I guess the answer will be no, is do any of these executive orders that the president is rapidly signing dealing with immigration, will that affect this one way or another? But you're telling me it already is a non-issue, is that right?
Well, I don't know what the president's about to sign, so I don't know exactly what's in that executive order. The implications that we've heard on the news is basically going to make everybody here illegally now, every illegal alien here now, eligible for basically being legal. He's trying through executive order to do something which President Obama said he couldn't do many times and then tried to do. And then when President Trump, I understand, tried to undo it the same way, was not allowed to court. So here we are again, I guess, doing that again, trying to make people here illegally legal. And by the way, I read a headline today that said Border Patrol people are not allowed to use the term illegal alien. That is the appropriate term for people who are not here in this country. It's not that they're undocumented, they are illegal aliens. That's in the statute, I believe.
Well, thank you for that clarification, Dr. Fox.
Mr. Burgess, Mr. Burgess, could I add, Mr. Burgess?
Sure.
Mr. Burgess, can I add that there's nothing specific in the bill one way or the other, but the employers do have the responsibility to comply with the Immigration and Naturalization Act.
Very well. My understanding of some of the executive orders, though, they're likely to vastly increase the number of people
Mr. Burgess, Mr. Burgess,
Yes.
let me just make so we could all hear everybody. So, Ms. Fox, you need to mute so that it doesn't echo. Okay, good. Okay, all right. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Don't think of it as an echo, Mr. Chairman. Think of it as a redundancy for emphasis. Well, look, I'll leave this, but it's just Representative Torres made such a good case for helping displaced workers, and I think we should be of a mind that we want to help displaced workers. The pandemic has certainly had that deleterious effect on people and their employment, but I also want us to be mindful of the fact that there are other areas in the federal government where we perhaps are disadvantaging those displaced workers. So I'm all for helping with on the apprenticeship side, but I worry that we are doing other things that are actually making it much more difficult for displaced workers. I've got some other questions that I'm going to hold for now, Mr. Chairman, but in your interest of time, I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. Is Mr. Perlmutter here?
Yeah, I'm here. I've been here the whole time.
Right, but you need to put your picture on.
Can you hear me?
I think it's just you.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I can hear you. Okay.
Oh, okay. Just kidding. Dr. Fox, Mr. Mr. Scott, it's great to see you. It's been such a long time. I pass.
See, you haven't lost your sense of humor, Ed.
That was a great line of questioning. I want to thank the gentleman. Mr. Reschenthaler.
Mr. Chairman, I would echo Mr. Perlmutter as well. So thank you.
Well, you're my new favorite member, so I want to say thank you very much. Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too am delighted to support this legislation and just want to welcome all of our wonderful new members to the committee. They've joined a fantastic committee with great leadership on both sides. So I yield back to you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Ms.
May I
Fox.
make a comment about Mr. Raskin? I
Yes,
want y'all to know that Mr. Raskin has been a good friend of mine almost since the time he came here to Congress. He's been a delightful person to work with over the years, and I'm always glad to see him.
that's nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fox.
And let me just say that that I think the most skilled person I've ever seen in the speaker's chair was Virginia Fox, because she made sure everybody voted on time, and we appreciated her leadership. Ms. Fishbach.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for your kind welcome, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Cole has been wonderful in his introductions, and I will pass on questioning, but I am excited and honored to be part of the committee. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Ms. Scanlon.
So happy to join this love fest. I think I asked all of my questions when we considered the bill last time, so I'm happy to pass as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morelli.
I don't know about your new members, but I'm desiring to be your favorite old member, so I'm going to pass as well. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Mr. DeSaulnier.
I will just ditto what Mr. Morelli said, but I do think the question for this term should be, where is the gentleman from Colorado? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ross.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'm very excited to see my colleague from North Carolina, Congresswoman Fox. We've known each other for decades and have worked on things in North Carolina. I'll be very brief. Since this bill was new to me, I, of course, wanted to look at it through the lens of what could be most helpful to North Carolina and the rest of the country. And I want to thank Chairman Scott and the committee for allowing me to add a very small amendment that I think will have a large impact in our state and hopefully in the country. As you probably know, I'm in the Research Triangle area where there are a lot of jobs, but not enough skilled workers for those jobs. And our community college, Wake Tech, has done a great job through its Wake Works program, but needs some additional support. And in North Carolina, there are two things that we've added to this bill: the recruitment of dislocated workers. We've had a history of textile mill closures. We have dislocation from COVID-19, and having an emphasis on those workers as well as non-traditional populations for recruitment, I think, is important. And then we also added a small provision to assist state apprenticeship agencies with apprenticeship hubs. And we have life sciences hubs in North Carolina. We also have particular areas where we've seen these dislocated workers. And for our state and for the country, I think these small changes will be very beneficial. And again, I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank Chairman Scott, and it's wonderful to see my colleague, Congresswoman Fox.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Cole.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask unanimous consent before we conclude the hearing portion of this to insert into the record a statement from Mr. Frenchville of Arkansas over his amendment number 29, HR 447, as well as 2 letters of support for the amendment, one from the Associated Builders and Contractors and one from the Opportunity America Jobs and Careers Coalition.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions of this panel? If not, I want to say to them, thank you for your testimony. You're now excused. We are now going to move to our next panel, which,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
thank you very much. Our next panel consists of Mr. Grothman from Wisconsin. We'll give a, supposedly he was here, but I don't know where he went to, but anyway, let's give him 2 seconds. See him?
I don't see him
So, hey, Mr. Kaufman, we don't see or hear you, so anyway, we'll make sure any testimony you have is submitted in the record. Are there any of the members who wish to testify on HR 447? Seeing none, this closes the hearing on HR 447. At this time, I would like to welcome our witnesses to provide testimony on HCon Res 11, establishing the congressional budget for the U.S. government for fiscal year 2021. I'm delighted to welcome Chairman Yarmouth and Ranking Member Smith. Without objection, any written materials you submit to rules documents at mail.house.gov before the conclusion of this hearing will be entered into the record. I am now going to recognize the gentleman from Kentucky, Chairman Yarmouth.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman McGovern. It's a pleasure to be here before the Rules Committee. My friend, Ranking Member Cole, also good to see you, and to all the members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be here. Yesterday, I introduced the concurrent resolution on the budget for fiscal year 2021, a bill with a single purpose, providing Congress with the option of using a budget reconciliation measure to get vital relief to the American people as quickly as possible. As chairman of the House Budget Committee, I'm honored to present this bill to the Rules Committee today in advance of floor action. The bipartisan legislation enacted by Congress in December was a step in the right direction, but it was only a step, and a long delayed one at that. The coronavirus pandemic and the resulting economic fallout continue to destroy lives and livelihoods across the country. The United States continues to set record high infection and death rates. Millions of Americans remain out of work as families are pushed to the brink of devastation, and our economy faces lows unseen since the Great Depression. We are not on the other side of this. We are deep in the trenches. COVID is getting worse, not better. Our recovery is painful and the most unequal on record. We have to do much more, a lot more. President Biden's American Rescue Plan lays out an aggressive legislative package to change the direction of these crises, including a national vaccine program, testing and tracing, paid sick leave to stop the spread, an extension of lifeline unemployment benefits that are set to expire in March, direct financial support for families so they can pay rent and put food on the table, and support so schools can operate safely. Our country desperately needs this relief, and economists across the ideological spectrum agree. Past crises have made it clear that doing too little will cost us far more. Weak support will lead to a weak, prolonged, and K-shaped recovery, creating unnecessary hardship for families and small businesses, and posing a more severe risk to our economic and budget outlooks than any deficits we might incur. Without the American Rescue Plan, CBO estimates it will take at least 3 years before employment returns to pre-pandemic levels. But with this vital support, economists estimate that we can bring the economy back to near full employment in a little over 12 months. We have the plan and the ability to do this. And thankfully, we can also afford to do it. Interest rates and inflation are at historic lows, lower today than before the pandemic. And the return on smart investments in the economy have never been higher. Economists of all stripes are telling us, begging us to use the fiscal space we have. They are warning that if we don't go big, We will be responsible for a long, painful, and unequal recovery that will cost more lives and more jobs, that will cause more businesses to close and result in more damage to our nation's economy, both in the short and long term. So what is the debate here? The need is clear. We are experiencing record COVID infections and deaths. Millions are unemployed and small businesses are closing every day. The plan has strong bipartisan support from the people we represent. Polling shows that 74% of Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, support the relief measures laid out in the package. And not just the relief package in general, the specific targeted provisions in the bill. Is it the price tag? Economists across the ideological spectrum agree that not doing this relief package will cost us far more. That we are moving too fast? January was the deadliest month yet for COVID. Every 28 seconds, an American died from the coronavirus. We don't need to slow down. We need to hurry the hell up. The resolution's budget reconciliation framework sets a budgetary target of up to $1.9 trillion, the estimated cost of the American Rescue Plan, allocated across the 12 House committees that have jurisdiction over some portion of the plan. The resolution instructs these committees to report legislation consistent with these budgetary targets to the Budget Committee by February 16. The Budget Committee will then combine the legislation and prepare it for floor consideration. This budget resolution does not provide a comprehensive fiscal blueprint for the next 10 years. Once this vital relief package becomes law, Congress can begin its work on a forward-looking, comprehensive budget resolution for 2022. The quicker we act, the more lives can be saved and the faster our economy will recover. We welcome Republican support, but are prepared to move forward without it. The human and economic costs are far too great. As the committee considers this legislation, I ask for a rule that will allow for meaningful debate. I look forward to taking your questions. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I would now yield to the ranking member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Smith. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, today we meet to discuss the Democrat majority's fiscal year 2021 budget resolution. My Democrat colleagues on the House Budget Committee have not held a hearing or markup on their proposal, or any proposal for that matter. In fact, we've not seen a budget from the Democrat majority in over 700 days. Moreover, we have yet to organize and even meet as a committee for the 117th Congress. What is most troublesome here is not the process, but the policies. What has been put forward by the majority is merely a vehicle, a means to an end, which is to use reconciliation to enact a slew of policies that will harm America's working class, increase the cost of living for American families, destroy jobs, and weaken the economy. I'd like to remind the gentleman from Kentucky that his state government has already received a $5 billion bailout and will receive another $4.7 billion under this proposal. While that very same government has enacted lockdown policies directly lending to the closure of more than 1,000 small businesses in Kentucky. If we want to deliver something useful for the American people, we must start with proper collaboration. Moving forward with a vague shell of a budget will do nothing more than tarnish the nation's trust in Congress and divide us even further. It is extremely important for this body to recognize the importance of enacting legislation that may benefit all Americans. Instead, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are using reconciliation and the pandemic as a way to ram through a progressive agenda. They must do better. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, as I said at the very beginning, what we're doing here is actually preparing in case we need to use budget reconciliation. There are ongoing talks with Republicans to try to figure out whether there could be common ground. We'll see whether there is. And I would just say that when I hear Republicans talk about reconciliation as if it's something that's never been used before, I recall that it was used by Republicans to try to undercut healthcare and throw millions of people off of health insurance, as well as for their tax cut. But anyway, we won't go there. I just will also say for the record, Mr. Smith, we are the Democratic majority, not the Democrat majority. We are the Democratic Party, not the Democrat Party. And I would hope that you would give us that respect to call us by the name that we go by. I have no question. I yield to Mr. Cole for any questions he may have.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, it's a great pleasure for me to see my good friend Chairman Yarmouth and Ranking Member Smith here. I always like to point out when Chairman Yarmouth shows up, he chairs two of the most important entities in Congress, the Budget Committee, obviously, but also the Bourbon Caucus, where the spirit of bipartisanship reigns under his leadership. And I want to thank him for that as a very loyal and longstanding participant in that organization. Let me start with you, if I may, Mr. Chairman, and ask, I mean, this is rather unusual. We normally would get the FY21 budget literally 300 days ago, a long time ago. Is there any particular reason why your committee didn't produce a regular budget for this year?
Back in 2019, thank you for the question. Back in 2019, we, as you know, with the agreement of the Senate, passed a budget agreement where we had the top line numbers. That was a bipartisan effort and resulted in my opinion, in a great stabilizing result for the Congress. We were able to do away with sequestration. We got through the Budget Control Act. We extended the debt limit, so we didn't have to have that used as a political weapon, as we often have seen. And with all that going on, there was no reason to pass a fiscal 21 budget resolution. We passed the top line numbers, and then the Appropriations Committee, on which you sit, made all the allocations. So I think we ended up with a very good result that has held us in good stead through this year. The problem right now is that we didn't do enough in December. As you may remember, the CARES Act we passed last April. March, we passed another bill in May. That bill, the CARES Act, was bipartisan. The bill we passed in May did not receive action in the Senate. We passed another bill in October to try and provide adequate relief for what we had judged at that time to be adequate relief, $2.2 trillion. That didn't receive passage in the Senate. In December, we finally agreed on a bipartisan manner on this reduced level of $900 billion. And when in doing that, we cut unemployment supplements, for instance, off in the middle of March. We put a number of other expiration dates in March. And maybe in good, we did that thinking maybe we would be past this. The fact is we are anything but past it right now. We are right in the depths of the COVID pandemic. And we saw just this past week, over 1 million people filing unemployment claims. We're not making any progress on that front. We're losing ground. So this is an emergency measure. And it's something that is vitally important. And I think that's why it has 74% support in the American people. And this was basically the same process the Republicans used back in 2017. They passed one budget resolution, reconciliation resolution for 2017, one for 2018, one they used, as Chairman McGovern said, to try and repeal the Affordable Care Act. The other one was used to pass the tax cuts. And in both of those cases, there wasn't any emergency. As a matter of fact, the economy was just steaming right along. But that was the strategy used then. This one, I think, is a much more, the timing of this need is great. And I think that as virtually everyone has said, if we don't do this, we're going to pay for it down the road.
Well, I agree with you about the 2019 budget agreement. I voted for it, and very pleased the Appropriations Committee did get the regular work done.
Yeah.
But I still think there's an obligation to produce a normal budget. Just the top line number, as you know, is not the only important number there. Having a plan to get hold of our fiscal challenges long-term, I think it's an important obligation. So I would hope going forward, the Budget Committee can work together, produce a regular budget this next year. Let me turn now to you.
Thank you very much for that. And I have committed to doing that for fiscal 22. And as the ranking member, Mr. Smith knows, I'm committed to him to do that as well.
I appreciate that very much, Mr. Chairman. I do. I think it's really important. Mr. Smith, if I could ask you, we did produce 5 COVID relief bills last year in a bipartisan manner, total over $4 trillion, or roughly $4 trillion in spending. We're only a month into this new Congress. Do you see any reason why we would be unable to once again produce a bipartisan bill to build on the work from last year?
You know, gentlemen, it's a great question. If you look at the 5 bipartisan COVID bills that have been passed in the last 11 months, totaled over $4 million, $1 trillion of that money has yet to be spent. And we just passed recently $900 billion in just in the last month, but over $1 trillion has not been spent. So if it's an emergency, that would be that the money is not there. There's $1 trillion in past COVID packages that have not yet to be spent. And all of those packages, like you said, gentlemen, was done in a bipartisan approach. There is no reason why this same package could not be brought forward in a bipartisan approach. In fact, it was great to see 10 Republican senators yesterday meeting with President Biden to discuss this. And hopefully that becomes more than just a photo op, and actually it turns into a bipartisan process instead of what's being jammed down our throat. 13 days ago today, the president stood before this Capitol and said that he wanted to unite America. And the best way to unite America is the first major piece of legislation that comes out of this body should be a bipartisan piece of legislation and not forced through a partisan approach such as reconciliation.
Let me ask you another question, if I may, Mr. Smith. And I want to say up front, I have great respect for my chairman, Chairman McGovern, and I appreciate his assurances that COVID-19 is what this measure will be used for. Having said that, is there anything in this particular resolution that will prevent it from being used for things other than COVID-19?
Absolutely not. As you can see, it's very broad and it can be used for numerous items more than COVID-19. Just this past weekend, members of the House Democrat conference suggested with a letter that more than 100 people signed to use amnesty, a pathway of citizenship, to be included into the COVID package. You're talking about the chairman of the Budget Committee on the other side of the building, Mr. Sanders, asking for minimum wage. There's numerous different items other than what clearly is an emergency that would fall under COVID. Medicare for all, expanding eligibility for Medicare has also been suggested by numerous members, along with items of the Green New Deal. The list could go on, and it is not limited other than what could be birded out through the Senate process under reconciliation.
Thank you very much. One last question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. This would be directed to Chairman Yarmouth. In looking at the reconciliation instructions contained in the resolution, they're pretty specific in some areas. 16.1 billion from the Ag Committee, 940.7 billion dollars from Ways and Means Committee. Given those specifics, it looks as if there's already a plan that'll be included in the reconciliation legislation even before we pass the budget resolution. So are there more specific things that we can expect or that you would anticipate would be added to this legislation?
Thanks for the question. The budget resolution that you have before you now was specifically tailored to the American Rescue Plan. that President Biden put forward. So, for instance, in response to Ranking Member Smith's comment about immigration, immigration would go through the Judiciary Committee. There are no instructions to the Judiciary Committee in this resolution, so there's no way that immigration reform would be done in this bill. Again, the amounts reflect what the estimated cost of the various provisions of the American Rescue Plan would be.
I actually have one other question, if I may, which I would direct to both of you, because you're our respective leaders in budget matters. Have either of you, have you had the opportunity to sit down and talk with one another about, what bipartisan approaches we might be able to take in the reconciliation bill? To Mr. Smith's point, I'm heartened to see the discussion between the senators and President Biden yesterday. I'm hopeful that will bear some fruit. I'm just curious if the two of you have had an opportunity to begin to discuss whether or not there are bipartisan manners that we could work together on in this.
Well, I go first. We have not talked about that specifically. We had a very cordial call when Mr. Smith was named the ranking member, and I would hope that we can work on a bipartisan manner on many things. I will say that in this bill, we consider this bill Plan B in terms of the next phase of COVID relief. This is a relatively lengthy process. As you know, it requires, as I mentioned in my opening statement, the committees develop the plan, it comes back, there's another bill passed, that goes to the floor. That will be marked up by the committee. The Republicans will have an opportunity to offer amendments. They will have an opportunity to offer amendments through the Rules Committee before the bill goes to the floor. So, but again, we see this as the less preferable option for acting. But we know, again, we have deadlines occurring in mid-March, at the end of March, and that's why we have to run on what we're calling parallel tracks. We hope that there is a bipartisan solution that can be done on regular order. That is everybody's preference.
Mr. Smith?
Mr. Cole, I would be more than happy to work with Chairman Yarmouth on a bipartisan.
Are you unmuted? Okay, sorry.
Can you hear me?
I can now.
Okay, perfect. Mr. Cole, I would be more than happy to work with Chairman Yarmouth. We've not had any discussions on reconciliation. We did have a very good conversation back in December, right after I was named as ranking member, but I look forward to the opportunity to work with him to make sure that we can deliver for working class Americans, because that's who's hurting the most. Their small business has been closed, they've lost their jobs, and I think that we need to do a very aggressive approach is helping them, but also a lot of the folks who've just recently been displaced by the stroke of the pen by the executive orders, whether they worked on the Keystone Pipeline or whether they've been affected by the stoppage in the permitting process and a lot of the executive orders, or even the border wall. I think that those are displaced American workers that clearly are looking for a paycheck, and we need to look for immediately.
Well, I appreciate very much Chairman Yarmouth's point that this may not be the preferred path. I understand you have to prepare for alternatives, but I would really strongly encourage both of you. I think you're both in important leadership positions. I hope you have an opportunity to see if there's a path forward so that we can have the kind of discussions that appear to be occurring between the Republican senators and the president. I think that's a healthy thing. I would really urge that we try to replicate that. And I know both of you to be very talented legislators and people that operate in good faith. And so, again, I hope things develop where you can also have similar type discussions. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to emphasize, there's nothing we're doing today that prevents a bipartisan deal. But let's be clear, right? The American people overwhelmingly, by 74%, the last poll I saw, support what President Biden is doing. And so, and people are looking for help. And they're not saying I need help, but only give me help if the Republican leadership is happy. So if we can work out a bipartisan deal, great. I'm not sure we all share the same values, quite frankly, when it comes to what needs to be done and what are priorities in this country. But here's the deal. If we can't, we need to move forward. And this protects that option. And I really, believe very strongly that time is of the essence. We don't have forever to talk about this stuff. And if we can come to some sort of agreement where Republicans are willing to support what the president is doing, then great. I'm not sure we're going to get the necessary number over in the Senate. But this isn't about negotiating for the sake of saying that we have a bipartisan deal for the sake of a bipartisan deal. I mean, we have to help the American people. Elections, have consequences, and quite frankly, the relief that people needed desperately it did not come in the last year, in large part because of the intransigence of the Senate. So we need to move forward on this, and I now would yield to Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, the budget reconciliation process gives us, as you stated, the option to make President Biden's much needed plan a quick reality. From the California perspective, 1 out of every 1,000 Californians has died as a result of COVID-19. Many continue to struggle every single day with growing infection rates. We need more vaccines. We need more testing. Our frontline workers need more PPE. We need more rent, food assistance, and unemployment. And families, our hospitals, our community clinics need a desperate lifeline. We cannot continue to gasp at issues that divide us and continue to debate on things that don't get our constituents the help that they need. So expanding eligibility for Medicare, we can have an entire debate about that. I think our hospitals would say, who's going to pay the bill for all of these people in ICU, and how do we, make everybody whole? I just want to urge my colleagues today to support this critical budget resolution, and let's move forward, I hope, together. But if Republicans aren't ready to sit down and be realistic about what the needs are in front of them, what their constituents need right now, Democrats need to do what we need to do, and that is move the bill that will be coming out of the White House forward. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we saw on the news shows last night that the 10 senators who went down and met for quite some time in the Oval Office. So I think people should take some comfort in that. Republicans are obviously willing to talk if we're given an opportunity. Speaking of opportunities, I now have a new opportunity on the Budget Committee. No one knows that yet because we haven't had our organizational meeting, but I'll be happy to join the Republicans as the rules designate on the Budget Committee, and look forward to a great many more of these discussions. As I understand, this probably won't be the only time we deal with reconciliation in this term of Congress. Let me just ask a question, if I could, and if it reflects the fact that I'm only just now on the Budget Committee and some naivete about the process. As I looked through the bill that is in front of us, obviously, well, can I just say this? The news stories today, the Congressional Budget Office is projecting that by July of 2021, that's 6 months from now, the economy will have largely recovered. I guess they are placing those projections based upon the number of vaccines that have already been produced and those that are going out, and the expectation that pre-coronavirus economy will rapidly return. I think that's right if we don't do too much to damage it in the process. But I guess my question is, with that expectation by the Congressional Budget Office that the pre-pandemic economy is literally right around the corner, does that of necessity ask us to look at the amount of stimulus that is needed? And I'm happy to hear from either of our witnesses.
Sure, Dr. Burgess, thank you for that question. Yes, the CBO did say that that in terms of GDP, the economy could possibly be at those levels back by the summer of this year. But in terms of employment, that's not the case. So this is another illustration of this K-shaped recovery we have, where the top line numbers on GDP don't reflect the pain and suffering that is going on with millions of Americans. We still, as I mentioned before, have 1 million people a week now applying for unemployment once again. We have almost 10 million people unemployed in the country. We have 18 million plus people on unemployment of one type or another. And what CBO also said was that in terms of employment, that this passage of the American Rescue Plan would bring the employment level down to pre-pandemic levels a year faster than if we did nothing. And again, what we've seen over the last 9 months is, or 10 months, is a very fast moving situation where things change almost overnight. We thought we were plateauing in the summer, and then went the other direction. We thought we were getting better in the fall. Now winter has made things much worse. That's happening all over the country. It's happening in everyone's jurisdiction in everyone's state. So if you look at the impact, in my opinion, if you look at the impact on human beings and not necessarily on GDP, you're talking about a situation which begs for significant action. And again, I'm not alone. The Fed chair, Jay Powell, has said this. The Business Roundtable has said this. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has said this. Economists from all across the spectrum, Moody's, Goldman Sachs. This is not just a bunch of politicians speculating, nor is it just CBO. I mean, these are the people who do this 365 days a year and for their businesses. So again, I think there's adequate evidence out there that we're in a very serious situation, and we need to act with haste, and we need to act in large amounts.
Well, with all due respect, though, the proposal that was brought by the 10 Republican senators and discussed with the president yesterday at the White House, where they talked about more narrowly tailoring the relief where it's actually needed rather than the broad-based approach. Look, last March 27th, we passed the CARES Act. We didn't know what we were up against. We didn't know how long it was going to last. So it was appropriate to push a lot of money out the door very quickly. Unfortunately, I have not seen since then, at least in one of my other committees, Energy and Commerce, I've not seen the hearings on how did we do with getting that money out? How has it been spent? Where is it languishing? I would actually like to have a little bit finer detail rather than continuing to respond as if it is a crisis where no one has ever seen anything like this before. We've been in it a year. So, Ms. Smith, let me just ask you, should we be looking at those things that are actually doing okay, not helping them anymore, and as the 10 senators yesterday pointed out, to more narrowly draw where it is actually needed?
Absolutely. Dr. Burgess first. We are glad to have your expertise coming to the Budget Committee, and glad that you're representing the Rules Committee. I want to hit a couple points on what you were discussing. There's more than $1 trillion that has been passed by Congress for COVID-related expenses, and it has not been spent yet. And I would agree with Chairman Yarmouth's statement that there's people that need help, and yes, they do. They need the schools to open, and I think that's a bipartisan approach. Schools need to open. The president is calling for the schools to open. We also need the lockdowns to end. Whether you look at New York or California, which are two states that have locked down more than any other state, They also have the highest unemployment rate. They're suffocating their small businesses and causing more people to be unemployed. And their death numbers are skyrocketing and are much worse than states that have been open, such as Florida, such as Missouri, such as South Dakota. And so the best way that people could operate immediately is stop the lockdowns in these liberal states, open it up. And there's over $1 trillion worth of money out there to be adjusted in the right aspect approach. So absolutely, we can find a bipartisan process. Open up the schools, stop the lockdowns, and more people will be back to work, unemployment will rise. CBO, the report yesterday from CBO was very promising because it said without an additional dollar of money being spent in the pandemic, we will return to pre-COVID numbers when it comes to GDP and eventually with unemployment.
My only worry about that projection was they hadn't considered the double digit of executive orders that we've seen that may have some deleterious effect on the economy. I'll just ask one other question. And just as I leaf through this reconciliation proposal, the item number 18, the net interest, starting with the current year that we're in, $365 billion in net interest. And that increases to the final year of this reconciliation to $727 billion in net interest. I guess this is based upon an assumption of the interest rates not increasing. I know last September, the Fed decided that it would hold the interest rate at an artificially low level, which I think is below inflation. But realistically, how long can the interest rate be kept below the rate of inflation and not have another unintended effect upon the economy?
Well, Dr. Burgess, we had a hearing actually in the Budget Committee last year where we had testimony from a variety of economists, from liberal and conservative and middle of the road economists. And basically all of them said, we are in a period, and obviously nobody knows, let's stipulate that, nobody knows for sure, but that we are in a period where for the next 20 years or so, they do not anticipate interest rates rising to any significant level higher than they are now. Again, I don't know how you project anything past 2 years now, but they all made that statement that they think we're in a prolonged period of low interest rates.
Well, the only point I would make is I don't think the inflation rate will remain at a low level if we continue to pump federal dollars into the system at the rate we have. And this ending value of $727 billion in interest payments, I think that may be artificially low, because if in fact the inflation rate does increase and the Fed does find it's necessary to increase the interest rate, it will be much higher than $727 billion. And I guess that's my only observation. I don't know, Mr. Smith, do you have a feeling about that?
Mr. Burgess, we're definitely in a fiscal crisis whenever you're looking at the interest that's just continuing to escalate. We're looking at, in the past years, $500 billion in interest on our debt. It's proposed up to 700. You're going to see it approaching and surpassing $1 trillion of just interest on our debt. When you're looking at $28 trillion as debt, we're in trouble, and we got to get serious about it. We do not have a revenue problem in this country. We have a spending problem. And of course, when you spend money that you don't have, that means you're borrowing it, and that means you're paying interest. And of course, the low interest rates are only going to be there for a period of time. They're going to go on up, and we need to start planning ahead now. But a lot of times people like to kick the can in this building, and unfortunately, there's a lot of cans being kicked around right now.
I thank you both for your coming before us today and sharing your wisdom with us. And Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Yeah, thank you very much. And let me just say, we have people dying all over the country, in red states and in blue states. And when the ranking member starts to try to divide us by saying, liberal states need to do this and liberal states need to do that, that's why the American people are so frustrated. And the bottom line is, I think that exchange probably more than any other exchange that we've had here today, tells me that what we're doing today, moving forward, this reconciliation process, is even more important. Because if that's the way we're approaching this issue, that somehow liberal states should be treated one way or disparaged, I'm sorry, that's not the way we should approach this. And it doesn't bode well if that's where Republican sentiment is on how we should deal with this crisis. I yield to the gentleman from Mr. Perlmutter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and that's kind of where I was headed as well. Mr. Yarmouth, I mean, the proposal that's being made in the American Rescue Plan, that's not a surprise. That was a campaign platform for Mr. Biden, was it not?
Absolutely. Every detail of the plan was talked about during the campaign.
And these things that are up for discussion in the American Rescue Plan were things that really were brought to the table in the Congress over the last year, but were not acted upon by the Senate, were they?
That's absolutely correct.
So this isn't any big surprise that's coming down the pike. And I appreciate the 10 senators going to the White House with a proposal, and maybe there will be some kind of an agreement. But I was asked today, shouldn't we wait for the Senate Republicans and the president to come to some kind of an agreement before we do this reconciliation? How do you respond to that?
Well, I would say last year, after it became, when we passed the CARES Act, I think there were a lot of people who said, well, this will be over in 3 or 4 months. And we passed the CARES Act with that perspective. Well, it became fairly obvious fairly quickly that that was not going to be the case. It was not going to be over by the summer of 2020. So we passed the HEROES Act in May, and then we waited and waited, and Mitch McConnell said, we need to wait, we need to see how things go. And we waited through the summer as things got worse and worse. And then we waited and waited, and finally in October we did, after negotiating for a long time, you remember at that point, Senator McConnell put forth a plan for about, I think, $1 trillion, just under $1 trillion, maybe just a little bit more. That was actually a third of which, or 40% of which, was money that was actually left over from the CARES Act. So it was very little new money. And that couldn't even he couldn't pass that in the Senate. Couldn't even get all the Republican votes for it. And so we waited and waited and waited. And finally, we got the bill done in December. So, and we all said at the time in December, and I said it in my opening statement, this was a good first step, but it's not nearly enough to get us to the other side of this crisis. So we waited essentially from April till December and then got a halfway measure. So patience has its limits. And I think, again, I will stress, we're doing this because we have to have a fallback position if we cannot get a bipartisan agreement. We have time limits that we have to act with. We have 18 million people on unemployment right now. Their supplement runs out on March 14th. We have other deadlines at the end of March. We would rather there be a bipartisan bill. It can be done much more expeditiously than the reconciliation process. But we don't have time to wait another 2 months or 3 months or 4 months to see if that's possible. So in a way, I think this is a way to actually put some pressure on both Democrats and Republicans to come up with a bipartisan agreement, because I think everybody would prefer that.
Well, and I agree with you, but like you said, we've been waiting since April, and this virus isn't waiting. I mean, we're at 450,000 deaths. And I would say to the gentleman, Mr. Smith, the Dakotas, which the last time I looked at them were pretty Republican, have had the worst, by far, the worst levels of the virus in this country. And so, let's not play this red state, blue state game, as the chairman had suggested. Let's not go there. This is a national, international, global problem we have to confront. And we're talking about the health of the people and the health of the economy. And as Mitch McConnell had us pause last summer, I think that was the terminology he used, pause, okay? When we won those 2 seats in Georgia, it's time to get moving and to fulfill the Biden promises he made about vaccine development and production, the distribution, getting unemployment checks out the door, helping small businesses, getting schools reopened. There are so many things we have to do, and we're not going to wait any longer. The one thing I would say to my friend from Kentucky, Mr. Yarmouth, in the HEROES Act, both of them, we did have the Safe Banking Act. And I would just remind my friend that if I have the opportunity to add that to this reconciliation process, I will do that. Now, I don't know whether I can or I can't, but I just would like to alert him to that.
I appreciate that. I'm a strong supporter of that proposal. And, the legislation that is will implement the American Rescue Plan, which follows this reconciliation bill, is open to amendment.
All right, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Rushenthaler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Ranking Member Smith, I know there's been a few accusations that you were trying to be divisive when you were talking about the difference of how states have treated the virus, the lockdown, and the total number of the death rates. Would you like to expand upon what you were saying?
Sure. Thank you, sir. Whenever you talk to American families who have small businesses and they've invested their entire life, their entire savings to keep their doors open, but they can't keep them open because whatever government shut it down, whether it's a liberal politician or a conservative politician, it doesn't matter what politician it is, it's a politician taking away someone's property. And what I'm saying is that science has not worked in these states that have been highlighted. The death rate in the state of New York is in the top three in the nation out of 50. And they've had some of the most stringent lockdowns. It's not working. And we saw the disaster that's happened in nursing homes, where they just found 3,600 more people that died from the policies of the governor there, bad policies that killed people. It's happened. And you know what? When you have family members, when you know people who have died of COVID, we've all been affected by it. And it's awful. But when you look at the state of California, Representative, where they do not allow outdoor dining, and you can't go to houses of worship, but you can go to strip clubs and tattoo parlors, that's not science. That is unreasonable, and people are losing their incomes, they're losing their businesses. That's why the state of California has an unemployment rate that's one of the top 10 worst in the nation. So what the American people are needing more than anything is for these lockdowns to end and to use science and be sensible. Open up our schools. And it doesn't matter if it's blue states or red states. We don't need lockdowns in any states. Use science. We've learned how to live with this for 11 months. Let's open the doors, because you're taking away from Americans.
Thank you, Ranking Member Smith. And I want to go back to what you were saying too regarding the fact that there was, I believe you said there's $1 trillion that has already been allocated through the other packages that is yet to be spent. Is that correct?
Absolutely. There's over $1 trillion from the $4 trillion plus that's been in the 5 packages that have not been spent yet.
If you look at what's being proposed and you add that to the other COVID relief packages that were passed in a bipartisan matter, I might add, if you add up what's being proposed and what has already been passed, it roughly comes out to $6 trillion. And just to put that in perspective, $6 trillion is more than the GDP of any other country in the United States, or in the world, with 2 exceptions, the United States and Red China. So just to put it in perspective of how big of a number we're talking about. Ranking Member Smith, with that said, I hate to ask you to speculate, but what is your speculation is why we're now trying to rush through an additional package when we already have $1 trillion allocated already?
You know, it's
Mr. Chairman, could I ask that one of them turn off their mics because there's a bad echo every time?
Yeah, so when anybody's speaking, everybody should have their mics off unless you're speaking.
Can you hear me? All right. No, it's really hard to. Let's think about this. There's $1 trillion left out there to still spend, including $58 billion of state and local that's out there. This proposal is asking for $350 billion of additional state and local funding, but they have $58 billion that still has not been spent in the prior package. This vehicle just creates an avenue for them to, they want to do reconciliation, regardless of whether it's pandemic or whatever. They're going to use the 3 different reconciliations that's there, and they're going to use it to promote their progressive wish list items that they have been talking about, whether it's the Green New Deal, whether it's amnesty, immigration, whether it's Medicare for all, whether it's universal basic income. They're going to use those 3 different reconciliations at some point. And if one of the members want to say that they're not, I would say in 18 months, we'll see how you use those 3 reconciliations. Right now, it's just smoke and members. You know, it's trying to use this as a vehicle to start it. But you know what? Ways and Means is part of the jurisdiction within reconciliation. Guess what? They can raise your taxes. They could increase the corporate tax rate under the pandemic in the sake of a pandemic to bring in another $1 trillion. At the minimum, they can do 1.8 to 1.9 trillion. But if they can find other additional money by increasing the corporate rate or whatever they want to change of any of the tax provisions, they can do it. It just gives them way more flexibility. But guess what? They have a 5-seat majority in the House and it's 50-50 in the Senate. So to keep everyone unified amongst their side, it's going to be interesting.
Thank you, Ranking Member Smith. And I know you were elected, I believe, in 2013, so this is not your first budget. But in your experience, has any other budget been advanced this way?
From the House, from the beginning of the House, in the 30 years that I know of, this has never happened where there was not a hearing in the House Budget Committee, where a budget resolution that originated from the House in the last 30 years, there was always a hearing in the House Budget Committee. This passed it. This passed it.
Thank you, Ranking Member Smith. I appreciate it. And thank you, Chairman. I would yield the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. And again, let me just say that I remember when Trump won the presidency, and we were told over and over by my Republican friends that elections have consequences. Well, the Democrats won this last election, and we have an agenda that we were trusted to implement, one that was very clear, one that resulted in Joe Biden winning by over 7 million votes, one that resulted in changing the makeup of the Senate, one that continued to keep Democrats in control of the House. And after listening to the exchange, about, basically ignoring all of the science and medical advice, I have to tell you, I am really, really glad that we are moving forward on this reconciliation proposal, because I mean, there is a huge difference here in terms of priorities, in terms of respect for science, in terms of reality. So, I think this is the right way to go. Again, nothing here precludes a bipartisan deal, but if the bipartisan ideas are like the ones we just heard, that's not what 74% of the American people want. I yield to Mr. Raskin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And I wanted to start just by thanking Chairman Yarmouth for his extraordinary work on this and his leadership in the process. And I want to associate myself very strongly with the remarks that you just gave, Mr. Chairman. It's remarkable and breathtaking to me that after 26 million cases of COVID-19, and today we went over 445,000 deaths, we lead the world in death count, we lead the world in case count, and of course for the last year, we've led the world in pseudoscientific propaganda and bogus miracle cures and what you might call loony lies and conspiracy theories, if I could borrow a phrase from Senator McConnell as he finally confronts some of the derangement that we've been seeing on Capitol Hill among members. This is a life and death question for us. So I feel very strongly that we move forward with the important mandate in the presidential election of 2020, which was won by more than 7 million votes by President Biden, and where more than 10 million voters rejected the incumbent. And these policies that have plunged us into the depths of despair, with hundreds of thousands of families across the country mourning the loss of family members in COVID-19. So I'm surprised at the turn the conversation has taken, but I think it demonstrates the fundamental importance of us moving forward as unified as we can be on the side of science, on the side of medicine, and on the side of serious public health protocols, the only kinds that have worked so far to stem the tide of death here. And that means masking, and that means social distancing, and it means taking it seriously and not undermining the Center for Disease Control, not undermining NIH, and not undermining what the scientists are telling us to do. With that, I'll yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'm happy to yield to Ms. Fischbach.
And Mr. Chair, I don't have any questions at the time, but I do want to just say, we do really have to deal with the reality of the increasing federal debt, and this is not doing it. That is something I did hear during the election, during campaigning, is that we need to get a handle on that debt, and this is not the way we do that by rushing this through. We need to be taking a hard look at what we're doing with all of these dollars, and if the issue is something, we need something critical, the $1 trillion that is sitting out there is something we could use, more immediately than rushing through this kind of reconciliation budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now yield to Ms. Scanlon.
I just was thinking on a little bit of history from just before I got to Congress and hearing how outrageous it is that Democrats might try to use the reconciliation process to advance the priority of helping the American people and the American economy recover from the COVID pandemic. Because the last big reconciliation bill was in 2017. And that was when the Republican Party advanced its priority of giving a $1.7 trillion corporate giveaway with tax cuts. So, as Mr. Yarmouth has expressed, we would prefer to provide a COVID relief bill in a bipartisan manner. But if the Republicans can't come to the table, and we spent 7 months last year waiting for the Republicans to come back from the pause and come to the table, and it didn't happen. The American people can't wait. That's all I hear in my district is we need relief now. So the Republicans are more than welcome to come along and help the American people. But if they can't seem to make it to the table, then we have to move forward. It has been too long a wait. So with that, I would yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Morelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think most of my colleagues have expressed much of what I believe about this, but despite my great affection for the state of Missouri, which is home to my favorite baseball team, and many people know how important baseball is to me. So as a Cardinals fan, it gives me I'm somewhat disconcerted when it comes to New York. And I do want to defend my state. People who have died from COVID shouldn't be looked at as New Yorkers or people from Kentucky or from people from Massachusetts. They're Americans who've lost their lives, and in my view, significantly due to the slow and inconsistent and too little response from our administration over the last 4 years. But having said that, I'm happy if someone at some point wants to give back the $35 billion a year, which New Yorkers send to the federal government and don't receive back in services, as opposed to my friends in Missouri, who are beneficiaries to the tune of about $24 billion a year. So I'm sure people like having New York as part of the union when it means we're contributing significant income taxes and other benefits to the federal government. And I'm sure there's other states that feel the same way. But I really think this sort of identifying state by states and who's died and who hasn't, I think is not only borders on inappropriate, if I might, but it also masks the bigger problem, which we need to have a federal response, a national response, and every single American who dies, whether in Missouri or Hawaii or California or Massachusetts or Oklahoma, is an American lost, and that's a life lost. And I want to speak up on behalf of all Americans who are suffering now and need some response. With that, I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Desaulniers.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I just want to associate my comments with my friend from New York. As someone from California, I saw Ms. Torres responding to some of Mr. Morelli's comments. And, you know, I think when we look at the past year in COVID, different states have unfortunately spent their time in a difficult period, whether they were rural, suburban, or urban. Even within California, we've had some diversity between Northern California, which I represent, and Southern California. And is a very diverse state with very urbanized areas with a large service industry. I think what we have attempted to do has been pretty daunting. Having said that, I'm aware that rural states have struggled. So just picking out a window, I don't think is appropriate. I would also say that I am hopeful, as the chair indicated, that we're preparing with reconciliation, but it's my hope, and I think all of ours, that we can have a bipartisan approach. And I think the president has said that over and over again. Failing that, I think we have to be prepared, as others have said, and certainly Mr. Raskin's comments about how important it is to support the science. In this case, as somebody who's a survivor of cancer, I don't listen to my doctors, I wouldn't be here now. So I just think if we focus, we can come up with a bipartisan effort, I think, in this regard. And the focus should be on what's the best rational approach to make sure this pandemic is crushed and we can get back to a normal life. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. The only thing that I would add is that I was home for the past 10 days talking to people who run hospitals and community health clinics, and all they want is to get more of this vaccine, more of the PPE, more support as quickly as they possibly can. And I, of course, want a bipartisan solution, but if waiting and negotiating back and forth over things that might be too partisan to resolve stop us from being able to help people get the vaccine, get the health care that they need, get the food assistance that they need, get the rental assistance that they need. I want to stop reading in the paper about small businesses and restaurants that have closed down. And I want to stop worrying about people who are not going to be able to pay their back rent and be able to pay their mortgage. It may be that we're going to come roaring back, but not everybody is coming roaring back. And there is plenty of pain and plenty of sickness and plenty of death that is going to happen in the next 6 months. And it's up to us to act quickly. And we cannot tie our hands behind our back. We absolutely have to move this budget resolution forward. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Does any other member of the committee wish to ask a question? Seeing none, I want to thank our witnesses. Mr. Yarmouth, thank you so much for your leadership. Mr. Smith, thank you. And you are now excused. Are there any other members who wish to testify on H-Con Res 11? Seeing or hearing none, this closes the hearing on H-Con Res 11. At this time, we will resume consideration of proposed changes to our committee rules, which we previously postponed during our abbreviated organizational meeting a few weeks ago. Every member has received a copy of the proposed rules, which have been publicly posted on the website since Friday. These proposed rules reflect our committee rules from the 116th Congress, with a few technical changes that I will briefly describe. First, the bill text and report availability requirements for our regular special rules meetings are updated to begin with the text of the document is shared with each of you, even if it hasn't been formally filed with the House. This conforms our practice with how the House's 72-hour rule operates. And two, our proposed committee rules also include updates to the witness disclosure forms as we use for non-governmental witnesses to conform with modifications made this Congress to the standing rules of the House. A copy of the proposed rules can be found in the document repository. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion from the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Torres. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the committee adopt the proposed committee rules.
Without objection, the proposed rules will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Okay, all right. So you've heard the motion from the gentlewoman from California. Is there any amendment or discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Cole.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will read the amendment.
I'd ask that the reading be dispensed with,
I'm sorry,
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, the gentleman is recognized.
Okay, thank you very much. First, I want to begin just by thanking you and expressing my appreciation. Honestly, we're beginning obviously a new session here. We're organizing, but I very much appreciate the manner in which you operate this committee. We all know it's by nature, a tool of the majority and certainly of the speaker, and it's a 9-to-4 committee. And I've been on both sides of that. And so I understand when I'm in the minority that the majority is using it for its purposes. But I think you do it in a collegial manner. You allow for open debate, and I think you seriously consider the suggestions that we make. And so I want to thank you for the way that you've operated the last 2 years, and quite frankly, for the way in which I know you will continue to operate. And same thing for your colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I mean, I think they reflect your leadership style, and I appreciate it. So my concern, certainly not with the way the committee operates or with the manner in which we go about our business. The amendment I'm proposing is really pretty simple. All it would do is ensure that if you self-execute an amendment from the chairman of the committee of jurisdiction for a rule, that you make in order an amendment from the ranking member of the same committee. You stated in the last Congress that, quote, "We welcome good ideas no matter where they come from." And I know that you'll probably highlight, as you should, the fact that you actually made the most amendments in order, I think, ever in a single Congress. I actually commend you for that. Where we have a problem is that the more than 2,700 amendments, 2/3 of them were Democratic amendments, over 2/3 or nearly 2/3. And, when you're writing the bill, you shouldn't need 2/3 of the amendments. Only 18% of the amendments that were made in order were Republican amendments. In addition, as you said, neither side has a monopoly on good ideas. We were in the majority. 45% of the amendments we made in order were Democratic amendments. Only 38% were exclusively Republican. The remainder were bipartisan. So again, we look at this, and a third of the closed rules, which the Rules Committee approved, were self-executed by changes by the chair of the Committee of Jurisdiction, preventing any debate or vote on those changes, even by the ranking member of the committee. I'm not surprised by the need for last minute changes because again, nearly 40% of the measures considered by the Rules Committee never even had a markup last cycle. I think that's something we ought to try hard to avoid. That's not your responsibility. That's the responsibility of the committees of jurisdiction, but they need to provide that opportunity. If we don't have markups, then you're certainly not going to have participation at the committee level, which actually puts an extraordinary burden, I think, on this committee to have to open up the process even more because we have not had an open process leading up to consideration of that measure. So on top of that, of course, and you and I vigorously disagreed with that, the majority chose to restrict the minority views by preventing Republicans from debating and truly offering the final amendments through an MTR, something that we've done in this body since 1908. It's a pretty sweeping assertion of majority authority and closing rather than opening the process. So given those concerns, I think asking that in certain cases, minority members be guaranteed an amendment when you're self-executing a majority amendment is not out of line. The amendment doesn't, by the way, force you to provide equity in every situation, just on a bill where the chairman is granted an amendment to rewrite the bill without any debate or any vote. So if you decide to move forward with a closed rule, as you did more often than not in the 116th Congress, and don't make any changes to it at rules, you wouldn't be bound to make a Republican amendment in order. So at minimum, I think we need a more open process. I think this is a way to get a more open process. So I would ask you to consider that as an amendment to the rules package.
I thank the gentleman for his amendment. Any debate or discussion on the Cole amendment? I have great admiration for the gentleman, and I will promise to work with him to try to make as many minority amendments as possible, in order as possible. But I think we need to look at these amendments, on their merits individually, and then make a determination based on that. So while I have nothing but the highest admiration for the gentleman, I can't support his amendment. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, who's that? Okay, yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I was going to say something, but being junior, I was deferring to people that are more senior.
It doesn't matter whether you're junior or senior on this committee. You can speak as much as you want.
Very, very deferential, Mr. Chairman.
Please don't say that, Mr. Chairman.
I would support my ranking member. Yeah, I just think that we want more ideas. We're a legislative body. I don't see anything wrong with this role in just adding another amendment to the process. It's frankly just good for debate, whether or not the idea is a good idea or a bad idea. I think that we're here to consider different options, give people a voice. So for that, I'm going to support the amendment. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
And I appreciate the gentleman's comments. Any other comments or discussion? Hearing none, the vote is on the amendment from the gentleman from Oklahoma. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
The opinion of the chair is the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, on that, I would request the ayes and nays.
The ayes and nays have been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings. Mrs. Torres.
No.
Mrs. Torres. No. Mr. Perlmutter.
No.
Mr. Perlmutter. No. Mr. Raskin.
No.
Mr. Raskin. No. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon. No. Mr. Morelli.
No.
Mr. Morelli. No. Mr. DeSaulnier.
No.
Mr. DeSaulnier. No. Ms. Ross.
No.
Ms. Ross. No. Mr. Cole.
Aye.
Mr. Cole. Aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Reschenthaler.
Aye.
Mr. Reschenthaler. Aye. Mrs. Fishbach.
Aye.
Mrs. Fishbach. Aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman. No.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Is there any other amendment or discussion? Hearing none, the question is now on the motion offered by the gentleman from California. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed will say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to.
In the spirit of bipartisan, Mr. Chairman, we will not ask for a roll call.
That's why you're one of my favorite people in the world. So thank you very much. So the motion is agreed to with the rules of the committee for the 117th Congress are adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Now, moving to the next item on the agenda. Clause 2D of Rule 11, adopted by the House, provides that the committee chair designate a vice chair to act on their behalf during a temporary absence. Pursuant to the rule, I designate the gentleman from Florida, the Honorable Elsie Hastings, as vice chair of the committee. And I would like to congratulate my friend Elsie. You know, few people in the House of Representatives have more institutional knowledge than our dear friend from Florida, Mr. Hastings. He served in the House for 28 years, including 19 years on this committee. We are fortunate to have his experience and his knowledge on this committee, and I'm proud to have him serve as our vice chair. And I look forward to the day when he is sitting next to me and Mr. Cole again, and all of us. He is engaged passionately in the debate of the day, as we all know he does so well. So I just wanted to say, so the next item on our agenda is the subcommittee size and ratios. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion from the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Torres.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to Rule 5C in the rules adopted, I move that each of the 3 subcommittees during the 117th Congress shall be composed of 5 majority members and 2 minority members.
You've heard the motion. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, the question is on the motion offered by the gentleman from California. All those in favor will vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The next item on the agenda is subcommittee appointments, and I yield to the gentleman from California, Mrs. Torres.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that the members serve on the subcommittees of the Committee on Rules as follows. The Subcommittee on Legislative and Budget Process, Mr. Hastings as chair, Mr. Morrell as vice chair, Ms. Scanlon, Ms. Ross, and Mr. McGovern as my majority members. For the Republicans, Mr. Burgess as ranking member and Mr. Cole. The Subcommittee on Rules and Organization of the House, myself as chair, Mr. Perlmutter as vice chair, Ms. Scanlon, Mr. Morrell, Mr. McGovern as majority members. For the Republicans, Mr. Reschenthaler as ranking member and Mr. Cole. The Subcommittee on Expedited Procedures, Mr. Raskin as chair, Ms. Ross as vice chair, myself, Mr. DeSaulnier, and Mr. McGovern as majority members. For the Republicans, Ms. Fishbach as ranking member and Mr. Cole.
Without objection, so ordered. Now is the time in this meeting that we handle a few standard housekeeping items that we do at every organizational meeting. Without objection, the committee staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to rules adopted by the committee and rules reported by the committee for the duration of the 117th Congress, as we have done in the past several Congresses. Finally, I have a general announcement that I want to make about designating a floor manager for rules that will apply for the rest of this Congress. As has been the standard practice for this committee, when we announce which member will manage a rule at the direction of the committee for the majority and minority, it is with the understanding that if the member is not available, when the House is ready to consider the rule, another member will be designated to manage that rule. We have concluded the organizational portion of today's meeting, and next we will move on to reporting out the rule for the apprenticeship bill and the budget resolution. At this time, the chair will entertain a motion from the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Morelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the committee grant HR 447, the National Apprenticeship Act of 2021, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Educational Labor. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. Section 2 provides that following debate, each further amendment printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report, not earlier considered as part of amendments en bloc pursuant to Section 3, shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent, and an opponent may be withdrawn by the proponent at any time before the question is put thereon, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. Section 3 provides that at any time after debate, the chair of the Committee on Educational Labor or his designee may offer amendments en bloc consisting of further amendments printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report not earlier disposed of. Amendments en bloc shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for 20 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Educational Labor or their designees, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the Rules Committee report or amendments en bloc described in Section 3 of the resolution. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule provides for consideration of H-Con Resolution 11, establishing the congressional budget for the United States government for fiscal year 2021 and setting forth the appropriate budgetary levels for fiscal years 2022 through 2030 under a closed rule. The rule provides 3 hours of general debate with 2 hours equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Budget, and 1 hour on the subject of economic goals and policies divided and controlled by Representative Beyer of Virginia and Schweikert of Arizona or the respective designees. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the concurrent resolution. The rule provides that the amendment printed in Part C of the Rules Committee report shall be considered as adopted, and the concurrent resolution as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the concurrent resolution as amended. The rule provides that Rule 28 shall not apply with respect to the adoption by the House of a concurrent resolution on the budget for fiscal year 2021. The rule provides that House Resolution 73 is hereby adopted. The rule amends Clause 3G3C of Rule 2 to read as follows, quote, C, upon receipt of an appeal pursuant to Subdivision B, the Committee on Ethics shall have 30 calendar days or 5 legislative days, whichever is later, to consider the appeal. The fine will be upheld unless the appeal is agreed to by a majority of the committee. Upon a determination regarding the appeal, or if no appeal has been filed at the expiration of the period specified in Subdivision B, the chair of the Committee on Ethics shall promptly notify the member, delegate, or the resident commissioner, the speaker, the sergeant at arms, and the chief administrative officer, and make such notification publicly available. The speaker shall promptly lay such notification before the House. End quote. The rule amends Section 482 of the House Resolution 38 to read as follows, quote, 2, a fine imposed pursuant to this section shall be treated as though imposed under Clause 3G of Rule 2 and shall be administered as though pursuant to Clause 4D of Rule 2, except that the time period described in Clause 3G3C of Rule 2 shall not commence until the Committee on Ethics has adopted written rules, and the chair of the Committee on Ethics shall notify all members, delegates, of the resident commissioner with pending appeals upon such commencement, end quote. Finally, the rule amends House Resolution 8, agreed to January 4, 2021, as amended by House Resolution 41, agreed to January 13, 2021, by striking February 11th, each place that it appears and inserting March 12th.
So you've heard the motion from the gentleman from New York. Is there any amendment or discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I have several amendments, unfortunately, because Mr. Burgess is not here to do his share. So I'm going to have to do a few more than I normally would do, but I do have an amendment at the desk.
Okay, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, first amendment I'm going to offer is to move the committee strike the language in the rule which automatically adopts a resolution related to fines and instead consider that measure under a closed rule and include the text of my resolution, Res 84, in lieu of your language on fines as it relates to magnetometers. And let me be clear here, I have no objection at all to the additional security. I think it's necessary. I think that's perfectly fine. But what my amendment would do is just ask that the administration or the Committee on Administration look at this and see if there's a better way to do it. And let me just offer an example. We all know members have concerns on the floor, but as members exit elevators, line up at magnetometers, they're crowded. It's very difficult for staff, particularly the clerks, the parliamentarians that are coming back and forth on a regular basis, have to go through that on a regular, repeatedly during the course of the day. What I was wondering is why we just couldn't subject members when they're coming into the Capitol complex to the same requirements we do that anybody else coming in. In other words, you would go through a magnetometer if you were coming through into the Capitol, whether you're coming through the Rayburn Tunnel or the Cannon Tunnel or through any of the other parts of the building. We don't go through them now. If that would not be another way. Now, again, that's just one of the ideas that we've come up with. It may not be the best idea, but I would just ask, and this wouldn't obviously deal with the magnetometers as they're there now. We would still be using them, but see if there's not a better, more bipartisan way to this problem we have of getting onto the chamber floor than we've come up with in the magnetometers. I'd also just submit we're putting an awful lot of Capitol police officers there that I think could probably be used in other places better and to better effect for all of us. It sort of ties them up for a lot of time. And it, again, very inconvenient to members that are in the building already to repeatedly be going in and out because you can't stay on the floor anymore the way we used to for repeated votes. So I just ask for that consideration, and maybe we can figure out a better means than we have right now of providing security on the floor so all members can get that, but can have a lot more convenience for the members, a lot more convenience for the staff that are on the floor.
So I just want to, I'm going to oppose your amendment, but I just want to know.
I'm shocked.
Yeah, well, I'm going to tell you why, because on page 4 of HRes 73, it already authorizes the Sergeant at Arms, the Ethics Committee, and the Committee on House Administration, and the Chief Administrative Officer to establish policies and procedures to implement the resolution. The Sergeant at Arms has the authority to determine whatever policies or procedures that they see fit to ensure our safety in the House chamber. And they can continually monitor the situation and adjust accordingly to further refine the process. And it's not that I disagree that everybody should be screened at the entrances of the building, but, maybe we could work together to fix the Capitol Police Board regulations to ban members from carrying guns in buildings so that the screening would still accomplish the goal of preventing anyone but law enforcement from carrying guns onto the House floor. So but there's flexibility in this. But look, I mean, we're here. We've had this regulation in place for over 50 years. It's never been a problem. And all of a sudden it has become a problem. And we need to respond to it. I wish we didn't have to take this step, but given the behavior of some of our colleagues, I don't think we have any alternative. So there's some flexibility in the language that we are trying to move forward, and we can work with the relevant committees and the Sergeant at Arms office and others to try to guide them or get they're the experts in security, tell us, what the best way to do this is.
Well, can I just quickly make a point? Sure. First of all, again, I just want to reiterate, I agree with you on the security front. We don't have any disagreement over that. And I certainly agree with you about anybody bringing a weapon onto the floor of the House. I don't think that's ever acceptable. That's been a long-standing rule. All I'm trying to get at here is maybe there's a way to provide this security in a way that is more convenient for all concerned, still is safe, I would hope, and maybe avoid the risk of crowding around the doors, and that's a COVID risk in and of itself, and it also, I think, creates a kind of unseemly appearance and elevates the potential for inappropriate activity that I would condemn myself. I don't ever think there's an excuse for yelling at a Capitol police officer who's doing his or her job or anything like that. So I just want you to understand the spirit in which it's offered. And I will work with you and hope our colleagues can work. But I just thought if the committee was actually tasked to do it, we would have a better chance of arriving at a more workable solution than I think we have right now.
So let me just say, I thank him, and I think we're not far off in terms of
No, we're not.
what we want here. And I think, there's some flexibility here, and we should obviously weigh in with the Sergeant at Arms office, among others, to figure out how we move forward here. But my worry is that, since we have the flexibility built into the language that we're moving forward, I think hopefully your issues could be dealt with. But I think delaying this would be a mistake at this particular point. So I thank the gentleman. I think Mrs. Torres wanted to respond.
Yeah, I just wanted to respectfully oppose the ranking member's request for an amendment. I appreciate your comments and I appreciate your stance on demanding, safety first on the House floor. I think the line that we have seen could be avoided if members just showed up on time during their group voting period, instead of waiting until I'm in the 6th group. Unfortunately, we get a wave of people at the very last minute. As it relates to members going through metal detectors at the entrance of our buildings, I very much support that, but I would oppose that being the only option. Members bring weapons inside their vehicles and through the garage system. We have a lot of access to our cars, and I am, I hope every single one of you on this committee truly respects, my position and my concern for my personal safety. I was in the balcony during the insurrection and the last group to be evacuated. My life may not mean a great deal to many of you, but it means a great deal to my family, the people that care for me. So I would hope that you would consider that as a priority moving forward. So I must oppose the ranking member's amendment here, but I would love to continue to discuss with you how we can all move forward together and feel safe in an environment where I always felt safe. If not for what happened on that terrible afternoon, we would be having a much different conversation. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Any other discussion? And again, let me just say to the gentleman from Oklahoma, we will work together on how we proceed. But in any event, hearing no other discussion, the vote is on the gentleman from Oklahoma's amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no.
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 Continue to chair the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask for the yeas and nays.
Yeas and nays have been requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings, Mrs. Torres,
No.
Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter,
No.
Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Raskin, Mr. Raskin,
Jamie.
Might have to scream louder.
Mr. Raskin,
He needs to unmute.
Why don't you come back to him?
Miss Scanlon,
No.
Miss Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli,
No.
Mr. Morelli, no. Mr. DeSaulnier,
No.
Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Miss Ross,
No.
Miss Ross, no. Mr. Cole,
Aye.
Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Burgess, Mr. Reschenthaler,
Aye.
Mr. Reschenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach,
Aye.
Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Chairman,
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Can I ask how Mr. Raskin was recorded?
Mr. Raskin is not recorded.
I vote no, thank you.
Mr. Raskin, no.
Clerk, report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Is there any further amendments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment to the rule, and I move that the committee provide an open rule on HR 447. That's the apprenticeship bill. And this is one where, again, I think we really could come to an overwhelming agreement, not just a majority opinion, even a bipartisan, but one that would be much more like when we reauthorize WIOA. There's no disagreement about the importance of apprenticeships here. Quite the opposite. Again, as I pointed out in my earlier testimony, we put every dime in that program that the Obama administration asked for, and then increased it when the Trump administration asked for more. I mean, this is really an important thing, as my friend Ms. Torres from California pointed out. So I just think we have an opportunity to make it a little more flexible and put some other consideration. I think it'd be healthy. I regret, look, I know at the beginning of the session, committees aren't fully constituted, but this is one that could be a big bipartisan win. So I would just ask for an open rule, let members, since they had no committee process here, we have lots of new members on that committee itself that didn't get a chance to offer any amendment in committee. So I think it would be appropriate in this case to proceed under an open rule.
I appreciate the gentleman's amendment. Any discussion? Hearing none, the vote is on the Cole amendment. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, no. No.
No.
The chair, the noes have it.
Mr.
Yes. Mr. Cole.
Well, I do have another amendment. These are now, I'm now at the Burgess amendments now, so please don't blame me for holding you.
No.
But anyway, I
So
have an amendment.
do you want to roll call on your amendment?
Oh, yes, I do want
Okay,
to roll call on that. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all right.
I'm just trying to speed us up here.
I always have you back. All right.
Yes, you do.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings, Mrs. Torres,
No.
Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter,
No.
Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Askin,
No.
Mr. Askin, no. Ms. Scanlon,
No.
Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli,
No.
Mr. Morelli, no. Mr. DeSaulnier,
No.
Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Ms. Ross,
No.
Ms. Ross, no. Mr. Cole,
Aye.
Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Burgess, Mr. Reschenthaler,
Aye.
Mr. Reschenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach,
Aye.
Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Chairman,
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Further amendments, Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to make an order, amendment number 3 to HR 447 offered by Mr. Allen of Georgia. This amendment prohibits the bill from taking effect unless the Secretary determines that individuals will not lose work-based learning opportunities. Point out, obviously, it'd be a Democratic secretary making this determination. It certainly would, not in any way limit what the majority wanted to do, and would actually just provide another safeguard. So the common sense amendment certainly doesn't restrain anybody, just adds an extra layer of secretarial scrutiny, if you will.
You heard the gentleman's amendment. Any discussion? If not, the vote is on the Cole amendment. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, no. No.
No.
Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
On that, I'd ask a roll call, Mr. Chairman.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings, Mrs. Torres,
No.
Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter,
No.
Mr. Perlmutter, no. Mr. Askin,
No.
Mr. Askin, no. Ms. Scanlon,
No.
Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli,
No.
Mr. Morelli, no. Mr. DeSaulnier,
No.
Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Ms. Ross,
No.
Ms. Ross, no. Mr. Cole,
Aye.
Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Burgess, Mr. Reschenthaler,
Aye.
Mr. Reschenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach,
Aye.
Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Chairman,
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
I have one more, and I think you're really gonna like this.
I'm gonna hope.
This is crafted with you in mind, and it's to make an order amendment number 12 of
Is it
HR.
Medicare for all?
Make an order number 12 on HR 447 offered by Mr. Thompson of Pennsylvania. It's actually a pretty common sense amendment. It just provides the Secretary of Labor with the authority to establish and administer additional programs of work-based learning, including to respond to COVID-19 public health emergency. Again, be your Secretary of Labor. He would only be doing it if he thought there was another program that was necessary or something that would specifically help with COVID-19. It's a very common sense amendment. It's the kind of amendment that frankly, I think if we'd had a committee process, might well have been adopted because it makes a lot of sense and provides a little more flexibility. And unfortunately, we didn't deal with that last Congress. I wish we had, and Mr. Thompson's offered again. I think it's a worthy idea and would ask for you to consider it.
You've heard the gentleman's amendment. Any discussion or comments? Then the vote is on the Cole amendment. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. No. The chair, the noes have it.
On that, I would ask the roll call, because I'm startled, Mr. Chairman. I thought I heard you say no, but I know in your heart you're a yes on that.
He said it 9 times. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings, Mrs. Torres,
No.
Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Perlmutter,
A reluctant no, but no.
Mr. Perlmutter, no. Raskin,
No.
Mr. Raskin, no. Ms. Scanlon,
No.
Ms. Scanlon, no. Mr. Morelli,
No.
Mr. Morelli, no. Mr. DeSaulnier,
No.
Mr. DeSaulnier, no. Ms. Ross,
No.
Ms. Ross, no. Mr. Cole,
Aye.
Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Burgess, Mr. Reschenthaler,
Aye.
Mr. Reschenthaler, aye. Mrs. Fishbach,
Aye.
Mrs. Fishbach, aye. Mr. Chairman,
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment is not agreed to. Are there any other amendments?
Just quickly as a comment, Mr. Chairman, I just think of future reference, when we get a reluctant no, we ought to get a half a vote out of that. So you would still have won, but Mr. Perlmutter would have felt better and our total would have looked a little bit better on the board. So just a point for future consideration.
I will take note of that, and we will talk to Mr. Perlmutter privately.
Sorry, Ed.
Is there any other amendment or discussion? Hearing none, the vote is now on the motion offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Morelli. All those in favor will say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no.
No.
The opinion of the chair, the ayes have, and the motion is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, on that, we would once more ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays have been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hastings, Mrs. Torres,
Aye.
Mrs. Torres, aye. Mr. Perlmutter,
An enthusiastic yes.
Mr. Perlmutter, aye. Mr. Raskin,
Emphatically yes.
Mr. Raskin, aye. Scanlon,
Yes.
Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Morelli,
Well, being that it's a motion by the gentleman from New York, yes, enthusiastically.
Mr. Morelli, aye. Mr. DeSaulnier,
Aye.
Mr. DeSaulnier, aye. Ms. Ross,
Aye.
Ms. Ross, aye. Mr. Cole,
No.
Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Burgess, Mr. Reschenthaler,
No.
Mr. Reschenthaler, no. Mrs. Fishbach,
No.
Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Chairman,
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk report the total.
8 yeas, 3 nays.
The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. Accordingly, Mr. Morelli from New York will manage this for the majority.
And Mr. Burgess will manage for the Republicans.
And I just want to let everybody know that this will be on the floor at 5 p.m. sharp today. Without objection, the committee is adjourned. Thank you all very much.